An unprecedented reaction to a murder in New York, not just from Americans, but around the world. The crime itself and the alleged killer creating an explosive response from conspiracy theories to viral memes. It's rare you get some anti-capitalists, influencers, conspiracy theorists, pop stars, left and right wing, all coming together to support the same person, even if it's not for the same reason. When that person is alleged to have murdered someone, it's even more surprising. But is it just forums, posts and viral videos? Or does any support for Luigi Mangione appear offline and in real life? I'm Jordan Dunbar. This is the Mangione Trial podcast from the BBC World Service. Our podcast looks at the reaction to the killing of Brian Thompson, who was shot dead in the US city of New York. Luigi Mangione was charged with his murder and his face went viral. He denies the killing. In these episodes, we take a step back to unpick the conspiracies, consider the facts, and explain what happens in court. In this episode, we're going to ask why pockets of people around the world have embraced an alleged killer and devoted so much time and energy to support him. What does Luigi Mangione mean to his supporters? With me to find out are Joel Finkelstein from the Network Contagion Research Institute. He specialises in social media and extremism research. Jacqui Wakefield is a global disinformation reporter with the BBC World Service. And Dr. Ioana Literat is a communications professor at Columbia University's Teacher College in New York City. I want to look at what we mean by support. The think tank Tackling Hate examined the digital dataset of 95,172 tweets from US-based accounts. They did it between the 30th of November and the 14th of December 2024, so just before and after the shooting. We've voiced up part of their report.
The findings revealed a striking pattern. Initially, public sentiment was divided, but following Mangione's arrest, negative sentiment towards Thompson and the healthcare industry surged. At its peak, tweets supporting Mangione outnumbered those condemning him, portraying him as a resistance figure rather than a criminal. Meanwhile, hostility towards Thompson intensified.
Joel, you work analysing those online reactions and extremism, and I'm interested in who's having those reactions in the United States. I think you've got some brand new data for us.
That's right. Our data suggests that what began with a sensational murder of the UHC CEO, Brian Thompson, appears now to be growing both online and the real world into a shift in norms that is now appears to be cultural. And there appears to be both a set of memes, political motivators, all of which suggest that we've moved beyond individuals or groups becoming outraged by a person and into the acceptance of political violence as a widely employed and celebrated tool of practice.
Okay, what do we mean by political violence? Is that just politicians or is that political causes? Break that down for me.
We performed a survey of Americans and we asked the question, we saw what was happening with Tesla dealerships across the United States, that these were now being burned. A lot of that was being celebrated on places like Blue Sky, and memes about Luigi Mangione were appearing in tandem with that around the Teslas and behind Elon Musk, right? So we saw a mutation occurring around the romance that the online world was projecting onto Luigi Mangione, who was suspected for the murder of Brian Thompson. We noted that this was now being invoked like a sigil, like a symbol that was occurring around other acts of political violence in order to romanticize them and recruit people who had shown eagerness for romantic violence into new domains to explore. We saw that on places like Blue Sky, on places like Reddit, people were talking not about assassinating Donald Trump or killing Elon Musk. They were talking about Luigiing them. They need to be Luigi'd.
It's worth a reminder at this point, Luigi Mangione has denied all the charges against him, yet his name's become a kind of a verb for a small but vocal group of people, essentially to describe political violence. That political violence, Joel, are we talking about a political cause, political motivation, or politicians? I want to be clear what that means.
Oh, I think when we talk about a culture, we're talking about all three. So what we set out to do in our survey was understand how prevalent are these attitudes, and where are they being demonstrated, And how widespread are they? And how are they associated with the cyber world? There are three things that we hypothesized would need to be satisfied for this to be culture. First, you have to have instantiations of violence itself. It can't just be hypothetical.
So you've seen actual examples of violence, is what you mean?
We've seen actual examples of violence. For instance, we had the burning of Governor Josh Shapiro, Democrat from Pennsylvania, whose house was an arson attack, suffered an arson attack during Passover. And we've seen other instances. We've had 2 assassination attempts against a sitting president in recent history, and now we see burning of Teslas and attempts to destroy offices of sitting representatives and members of Congress. The police have noted that there's been a doubling in the threats against sitting members of Congress this year compared to last. Right. So that's the first part of how we determine if this is a culture. Do we see a lot more of it? Does that appear to be systemic? The second part, Jordan, which we'll get to, I assume, in your next question, is, how do we know? Is this reflecting changes in people's psychology? And do we see signals of this? Do we see symbols online celebrating this actively?
Well, tell me about the new data that you have. Give me some of the numbers that your research brought up.
So we asked about violence towards political leaders. We asked how acceptable or how justified do you think it is to assassinate President Donald Trump? And what we found was that close to 40%, 38% of Americans thought that it was at least somewhat acceptable to assassinate the president. When we split that up into political divides, we noted that close to 55% of self-proclaimed liberals, or people left of center, were at least somewhat justifying the assassination of Donald Trump.
Joel, I'm just going to step in for a second. When we say liberals, for people not in the US, we're talking about those who would be described as maybe left of centre. So they'd have progressive social values, they'd be less happy with big business, and they'd most likely vote Democrat. Would that be a fair description?
Fair description. Our models suggest they are a significant proportion of the population that are participating in assassination culture and permitting the justification of violence. When that violence is justified, it lowers the threshold for the next action. So when you have just a generic, abstract example, is it okay to assassinate a political leader? We see that in general, there's been a shift in norms on what appears to be largely on the left. Now, listen, for the audience at home and for folks who think this is about calling out the left, it's not. It's very clear that this is something where the shoe can be on the other foot very readily. Losing an election and losing political power, it's not uncommon that drives an instinct for revenge. It drives instincts of helplessness and feelings of no capacity for political control that then need to exercise a sense of control in other domains. So I don't think this is something that is completely intrinsic on the left or the right. But I think it's becoming so problematic when you have leaders on the left and the right who are being attacked. You have violence that's becoming more normalized. We had bullets literally within inches here in the United States of completely upending our political system and creating a future that would have been extraordinarily bleak. Okay, that should have us all with our hearts on our hands on our heart.
We shouldn't be looking at this like it's just a problem of the left or people who might have voted Democrat at all, because your figures also go across the board. I mean, in the past, we've seen right-wing groups talking about political violence, like during the last Democratic presidents, for instance. Your figures show that it's about judges here more, right?
Recently, there's been several judges that have been blocking the administration's attempt to deport people, and there's been a lot of anger on the right. And we polled people about that. We found that indeed there's 10 or 15 percentage more point different spread between self-proclaimed people who are right of center endorsing political assassination against judges. Right now, it's not astronomical. It's not totally equivalent.
Okay, and when we say people on the right or right of centre, we're talking about those who would have more traditional social values, would be less in favour of big government interfering and more likely to vote Republican.
Yes, it's there on both sides. It can be called out on specific circumstances. So my sense is that we need to walk this back. When you have governors who are coming under attack and their houses are getting burned down on a sacred holiday, when you have presidents where bullets are whizzing past their ears and we're within inches of potentially revolutionary violence, And when you have, CEOs who are being murdered, Teslas being burned, leadership on both sides have got to come together and walk us back from hopelessness here. Because if we can't sit down and agree that murder is off the table as a political instrument, well, it's been a great project, this democracy thing, but that will literally be the end of it. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter who those politicians are. It could be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Steve Bannon who have that conversation and say, whatever else is true, this is off the table. But we need to be having that conversation.
How far have the memes about Luigi Mangione become a kind of a rallying cry for violence against the establishment or authorities, become almost a verb?
It's a great question, but I think we're seeing on Blue Sky and on Reddit that you have users who are now calling for someone to become Luigi'd. Right, so that it's entering the lexicon as a kind of shorthand for a glorious execution that's widely celebrated. It's remarkable. It's remarkable that the name of somebody who is a suspected murderer in cold blood could be used that way across the internet and even in the halls of power.
One thing I'm interested in, Joel, is how much of this is just some people venting, just people being angry online rather than actual threats. You mentioned there were some real-world examples, but surely some of this is just online anger.
There's no doubt about it, but the nature of a culture or a permission structure is one where you don't have to have everybody loving the idea of violence. All you have to do is have them playing with it. All you have to do is have them creating an idea that our systems are so unjust and broken that this is justified. The justification is ultimately what lowers the threshold for the next actor. So most of these people, to your point, don't mean it. And you can say we don't care about those people, but it's always those 1% we have to worry about, right? Or the 0.1%. It's always the ones who are willing to act out that are barely contained by the norms that everyone else has. And when the leash goes off, when the ropes are cut, and people feel a sense of disgruntlement and hopelessness, then that's exactly when those people can act with the fewest consequences.
Joel, thanks so much for joining us and talking about this new research. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you. So that's the extreme end of attitudes to political violence and how that relates to real-world incidents like the killing of Brian Thompson. It's worth saying this is one survey with interesting findings, but it is only one piece of research. Let's look at a different aspect now. How some support for Mangione seems to have appeared through sharing of memes. Luigi Mangione features in dozens of online memes, jokes and viral trends. Yeah, he's a murder suspect. To discuss that with me now is Dr. Ioana Literat, a communications professor at Columbia University's Teacher College in New York City. Ioana, thank you for being with me today.
Hi, glad to be here.
Ioana, what's the significance of this case for you compared to other big trials that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, so for me, a key argument in my work has been the need to take seriously the role of form in online political expression, like how things are expressed, not just what's being said. And we risk dismissing young people's political expression because what looks silly or trivial to outsiders or maybe to older generations is really how young people today are engaging really deeply and meaningfully with politics.
Talk to me then, what do the memes tell us about young people's political opinions and how they express them in America in this case? What do they tell us about his supporters?
A lot of them have this kind of "I could be him" message. And this is very subtle but important, right? That Mangione is not just a scapegoat or a hero. Sometimes he's been simplified as such. But what I'm seeing on social media is for a lot of people, especially young people, he's a kind of avatar for their own breaking point. Right?
So he's one of us.
Exactly. So you'll see comments and posts like, "This could be any one of us." The only difference is he's snapped.
How has this idea that he's one of us, it could be any one of us, how has that come up?
I think the larger context is really significant here. That in general in the U.S., right, where it's a moment of institutional disillusionment.
What do you mean when you say that? As in people don't trust the authorities, they don't trust
Yeah,
the
and
old
often
ways?
a lot of people feel on both sides of the political divide. They feel like they've kind of been betrayed by institutions, right? They feel let down by healthcare, by higher ed, maybe by housing, by politics, by the media, you name it.
Something else that might seem superficial, but I think is really important in terms of how viral he and the case has gone, is his perceived attractiveness. He is treated differently by the internet because he's conventionally attractive. What's your work showing you around that?
We use the term algorithmic capital to describe the kinds of traits that make content do well online, right? So things that platforms favor algorithmically, like emotional intensity, visual clarity, adhering to these dominant cultural and aesthetic norms, and conventional attractiveness is one of the most powerful forms of that capital.
So you can be good looking offline, but there's a different type of good looking online?
Yes. Yes, exactly, exactly. And pretty privilege, if we want to call it that, doesn't just make someone visible, but it makes them narratively viable online, right?
Narratively
So
viable, what does that mean?
yes, if you look like him, it opens the door to a range of feelings. It opens the door to empathy, to complexity, even forgiveness. And so people can write different stories upon him. Right? So it's not just that he's visible, but he's open to this kind of narrative construction around him.
So because
And
he's good looking, people are more likely to trust him, feel sorry for him. He doesn't look like what maybe a stereotype of a violent criminal might be. So that all helps.
exactly, exactly. Like if he had looked different, would people be remixing his story with melancholic edits and slow-mo zooms? Like probably not, right?
So what happens to people who don't have algorithmic capital, who have, negative algorithmic capital? Do they get memeified?
Not as much, and they don't get this kind of range and complexity and ambiguity. Like there's so many stories. Again, we don't tend to treat criminals that are conventionally unattractive or not conventionally attractive or that aren't white or that aren't privileged in the same way.
It's interesting, Ioana, because he's denied this crime. There's a trial going on. And yet the way you're talking about it, people have fetishized him anyway, even though he said, I'm not guilty. But they've said, well, that's not what I think. I'm just going to go straight ahead with this.
Yeah, and you don't see a lot of talk online about how he is innocent. And, you don't see these internet sleuths like gathering evidence to prove his innocence. That's not really the main gist of the content.
We've said young people, but who are the people with these kind of opinions and that are spreading the memes? Is it based on gender, sexuality, demographics? Who is it?
I feel like we've seen a little bit of an evolution when the story first broke, when he was arrested. It was everybody jumping in, sharing those memes of I was with him, he was with me. But now, recently, it's become a more gendered conversation. So now you mostly see young women responding to the case, and you see more of the kind of thirst traps.
What's for people that don't know, what's a thirst trap?
Basically content about how hot someone is online, right, and how you're thirsting over them, and most of it is posted by young women. Yes, he may be guilty, but he's also really hot.
How much of a part has the media played in this? I'm just thinking of one of the most used photos of him is him topless hiking.
Yep,
this outdoorsy lifestyle. He looks incredibly healthy and athletic.
I think that picture really epitomizes the kind of masculinity that he embodies. He embodies this kind of soft masculinity with edge, which plays well across TikTok and Instagram and Reddit and Tumblr. Like, he looks like someone that is right now very much in tune with the cultural zeitgeist when it comes to male attractiveness.
Ioana, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice being here.
So far, we've been concentrating on pockets of support in the United States, but the reaction to this has been truly global. Jacqui Wakefield, global disinformation reporter with the BBC World Service. Hi, Jacqui.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Jacqui, you look at social media and online trends worldwide. How big has this case been?
So the places that I've noticed a lot of virality and popularity around Luigi Mangione is China, Brazil, India, the Philippines.
Before we get into why each country, because that is fascinating, why they'd be so interested in this case, what kind of support or reactions are we getting?
Yeah, so you're getting a whole mix. So you've got the kind of groups of people that I would class as fans. They're the ones that are organising fundraisers. Another aspect of the behaviour is sort of the jokes around it. So one meme that we saw, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, is people were pretending that they were with Luigi Mangione the night that the shooting happened. So they were trying to provide a joking alibi for him. Then you've got the aspect of the online sleuths. So these are people that are typically true crime fans that are trying to piece together different conspiracy theories for the case. And then you've got the last aspect where it's kind of the, I suppose, just more of the advocacy side of the fans. So people using this to sort of advocate for healthcare reforms in their own countries around the world.
Yeah, healthcare has been such a big issue around this case, and we've done an entire episode on the US healthcare system, but we're not talking about the US here. The things you're talking about are outside the United States. This is international.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think it's because, and a lot of the fans and people online have suggested that it's because people are struggling with healthcare everywhere. So people are kind of finding different aspects of the case that applies to their own, I guess, local context.
There was a huge reaction on China. Give me an idea of the numbers and what people were posting about.
Sure. So the topic hashtag Luigi has over 90 million views and over 400,000 posts, all about Luigi Mangione on Red Note. So that just gives an idea of the scale of how many people are engaging with this topic. And if you just have a look through some of these posts, a lot of them are like really high production value. So one in particular, a Chinese user does his makeup and dresses up like Luigi Mangione and then even copies his perp walk that we've seen in real life as well.
So copies the walk that he did up to the courthouse.
Exactly.
That's just one social media platform in China. Are we seeing it in other places too in China?
Yeah, so there is a lot of discussion on other Chinese social media apps, particularly like the Douyin, so the actual Chinese form of TikTok. There's a lot of chat on there. It's just a little harder to monitor from a Western perspective.
So that's China. Where else in the world has this really taken off?
It really took off in Brazil as well. And I think there's something here with Brazil. So Brazil is kind of known for being quite enthusiastic fans of things. So there's a kind of commonly known phrase in Brazil. So every time any celebrity posts anything, all of the comments say, please come to Brazil. So once again, he's sort of captured this public attention. At one university in Brazil, they hosted a Luigi Mangione lookalike contest.
We're describing it as fans and people sound like they're having a great time, totally divorced from the fact that there's a criminal procedure going on, someone's on trial for their life, there's a victim and a family.
You've got the real, just kind of like fan behavior who are kind of, I guess the word would be like, they're attracted to him and think his message is something that somewhat fits with their own politics.
And I believe in the Philippines, there's been a huge reaction.
Yeah, so Philippines has been an interesting one. So that's been smaller but more intense reaction is how I would say it. In the Philippines in particular, they've really dug through his history online and the things that he's posted. So they've shared excitement that he's seemingly a Pokemon fan. They've also looked at his Goodreads account to see what books he's read in the past and what reviews he's given them. So yeah, once again, there's been a lot of discussion in the Philippines too.
And that description there, where you've called them fans, that really does ring true in that sort of behaviour of going through the background. And the sleuthing, we have an entire episode about the conspiracy theories, looking at them and picking through the facts. So they've really taken to the fact that they think he's done something for a reason. They've kind of invented this backstory that they agree with. They're not waiting for the trial or the facts, because we don't know. He's denied the killing. We don't know any motivations or anything like that. But they've just gone ahead and created this whole narrative themselves.
As you said, he's not admitted to the killing. He's denied it.
And the final country was Japan.
Yeah, Japan's an interesting one. So Japan is one place where Luigi Mangione has been a little less popular. Once again, his online footprint has sort of played into this. He went to Japan himself and he criticised the country, saying that they had cultural issues which caused their falling birth rates. He criticised things like the esports cafes. He also said that the maid cafes there should have been more stigmatized. He also said that the modern Japanese urban environment is an evolutionary mismatch for the human animal.
So there was a big online reaction. It just wasn't support. This was actually criticism of him.
Yeah, again, it's one of those, Japan's one of those places that he didn't really take off, and you have a lot of people criticizing the fact that he, once again, we're not sure if the trial hasn't happened yet. He has denied any involvement, but people in Japan are more talking about the fact that he did kill the CEO, and they believe that he did, which is kind of the opposite that we're seeing from other fan behaviour.
And so if people are inventing their own narratives around the world and trying to link it to their country and whatever's happening there, do you think as the trial plays out and we get more actual facts, will that change it, or is it just taking a life of its own that doesn't really matter?
I think it kind of depends who you're looking at. It's really hard to say whether they'll believe anything that officials release as we go through the court case.
Jacqui, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it from this episode of the Mangione Trial podcast from the BBC World Service. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the World Service YouTube channel so you never miss a thing. If you have heard a claim you want us to fact check or a question for us to tackle, email us at themangione@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp us. Just scan this QR code.